it.
Oh, yeah, buddy.
Norco didn't just redesign the Optic, they totally rethought it. And it seems like they thought it was time for the Optic to ditch its conservative tendencies, give up all the giving up it's done, and finally live its best life. And we're glad they did. The new Optic was burly enough for anything Park City, Utah could throw at it, but it was still kind of hard to define.
I felt like this was a bulldog of a short travel bike. It
Totally
almost,
agree.
Right? It almost felt like slopestyle meets trail. I felt like it was extremely supportive. It ramped up well, and its 125 millimeters of rear travel felt like, I mean, it felt like more travel than the Orbea Occam had, which was a 140 bike.
Yeah, and let's boil it down just a little bit to what exactly Norco's done here and what their thinking is behind it. So they have spec'd a Super Deluxe Ultimate D8 shock on there. So basically they've banished any kind of compression lever on it whatsoever, because they say, look, we don't want this fucking thing on our bike anymore, right? We don't need it. Our suspension is good enough, and what this is going to do is this bike doesn't need it, and that's just saying a lot right there.
And what compression adjustment you could have is located at the bottom of the shock between a couple cables. It's not something you're ever going to reach while you're riding. It's kind of a pain in the ass to reach when you're not riding, but I disagree with you. I think it does need it.
We have reached an impasse.
Horsepower link bike, climbing, it climbs well seated, you stand up, it does what these bikes will do if there's not some kind of compression damping platform in there and it bobs. It felt like a big bike going up a hill.
No, there was a tiny bit of that, but seated and smooth climbing, I felt like the kinematics worked really well in unison with that shock, and it climbed spectacularly. Well, yes.
That might be a little
It's a little high.
I don't know if I would say spectacular, but it was good. I think like it could compete with the Tall Boy and the Occam. It couldn't beat them, but I think it was in the same class.
I thought maybe I was in the same class. I was held up a little bit by the tires, unfortunately, and it was a wet, rooty day. Other than that, I think it was on par.
Yeah, and let's also remember that this bike's a few $1,000s less than the Occam that we rode.
Yes.
So that is certainly a factor. Weight plays into climbing performance in a big way. And you know, I still, even though it wasn't as efficient as that bike or as the Tall Boy, I was still happy to get out of the saddle and put power into the linkage. I didn't feel like I was just wasting all my energy.
And then flip it around and then compare it to those two bikes going downhill.
It has, in a way, I think, a similar feel to the Tall Boy in that it's got that really supportive rampy suspension. It just feels deeper, and the bike feels longer than the Tall Boy. So, like, to me, I mean, I rode this on some really steep, like, fairly gnarly trails here and had a great time on it. And it's got a 65-degree head angle, which is probably a big part of that.
Reminds me a lot of a 2-year-old Transition Smuggler. I thought it was a big, long bike with not enough suspension for how big and long it was. And I missed the old Optic. I missed the Optic that had shorter travel and was more of a cross-country bike. And maybe that's where I came to an impasse with this bike. It felt sluggish going up the hill to me. It felt wonderfully stable going down, but it didn't feel any more confidence-inspiring or composed than the Occam that you're comparing it to. And yeah, I struggled to like the bike.
That's what happens when unorthodox bikes like the Optic come out. They can be a little polarizing, but it's more of a deep cut than a one-hit wonder. Norco knew exactly where they were going with this bike, and they took pains to get it there.
I mean, this is the direction that they're going, right? This is it.
Right.
They've chosen this path. I think they've done a nice job with this bike as far as the geometry. the shock tune, they didn't make that shock, right? RockShox doesn't make a downhill specific shock for that stroke and that eye-to-eye length. It doesn't exist, so they had to go pick up the phone, bring, hello, yes, we'd like to make this bike and have this shock, and then they were like, great idea, and then it went from there, right? It didn't exist anywhere.
And I agree with both of you in terms of like how its downhill behavior, it performed beautifully. Like, it is really nice suspension for the travel it has. Definitely feels like there's quite a bit more of it than there really is.
Yeah, I think this bike appeals to a very specific kind of rider who wants short travel feel. They want that feedback from the trail, they want the support, they want the ramp, but they want the shape of a long travel bike and the confidence that inspires.
Which, when it comes to angles and wheelbase, that's exactly what this bike is.
It's got all the numbers that we've been talking about all week, right? 76 on the seat tube angle, 65 on the head tube angle, which those numbers for the travel are a little bit more progressive than some of the other bikes we've had here.
It's a long bike. I think some of my criticism that I've already leveled at it, which I will stop doing now, probably would have been alleviated if I'd been on a medium. This is one of those, like, as we're getting longer and longer and slacker with bikes, at 5'9", I used to ride larges all the time. There are a lot of bikes that I should be moving down to a medium on now, and I feel like this is one of them.
Yeah, fair enough. I can see that.
And I probably would have had a lot more fun.
Shall we now loop back around to component spec?
Please.
Well, it is an odd spec on this bike. So it's a $4,500 build. The front triangle of the frame is carbon, the rear triangle is aluminum. And it has some really nice parts, like some carbon SRAM cranks. It has some DT350 hubs, which are very efficient, fast-rolling, good hubs laced to Stansflow rims. And then there are some low lights to the spec.
Brakes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least it's a 4-piston brake.
Right.
Okay, and then...
But it doesn't matter how many extra pistons are on there if they don't really slow it down that well. Which is, these weren't great brakes.
Yeah, and a big part of that was the rotors. It comes with, like, Shimano's, I think, their most basic rotor, which requires the use of resin pads. And so that is an upgrade that you can make, but, and even the levers themselves, though, are a no-name lever. It's not an SLX or an XT, and I think at this price point, I'd like to see a more fully featured lever and caliper.
A lot of my criticisms about this bike could be alleviated. For instance, like with the brakes, it would be easy to get a lot more power and modulation out by swapping out pads and rotors. That costs about $90, and I think would make the bike a lot more fun to ride.
I do think they hit the mark on this bike as far as rear suspension performance, which was sublime in my opinion for that amount of travel. Felt like a lot more, it was spot on. And the whole package as well, of course minus the goofy spec again, but they hit the mark. This is a rowdy 125 millimeter 29er that is based around suspension performance and just being a trail bike.
Fair enough.
There you have it.
The Optic is a unique mix of aggressive geometry and short travel, something not every brand is doing. And there's a reason. It's not for every rider. But if it's for you, few of its competitors are as well thought out as the Optic. We've got the full written review and the rest of the Bible of Bike Test videos at bikemag.com.